We're going to take it from chapter 5, page 8. 6 lines down. Actually, 7 lines down. Right? It says over here that in the Zohar it brings this concept that the hishavus ha'osios, that the division into letters, bechinis HeChaltzu, in a way of division, right, happens through the midos dafka. We spoke about it yesterday. We gave an example before class was over about this idea of like the water kum, which I think is a very good example. Physically, it's hard to find something to like explain this, but you have this idea of the rocks in the water, right? So you either have the water in the rocks is like light and vessel, right? And they trade places depending on how high you are or low you are in the worlds. If you're in the higher worlds, the rocks are dissipate, right, and dissolve in the water, and that's what we call like the vessels are bottled to the light. So there is really nothing containing the light, because that which would contain them is like the rocks, which could be a kli. The light is so strong, whatever, so hot that it can't form itself into anything, and it's just negated inside of the light. So therefore, it's like an unbounding light. When you go lower and the water gets colder, so to speak, the light gets less powerful. So the rocks begin to emerge, and then not only are not nullified in the light, but they actually contain the light, and the light becomes held and limited by them, right? And those are called the letters. So the letters are either in a state of like total bittul, where really all you see is light, and there is no presence of any kli, except for in a potential state. Or as you get lower and lower, the letters emerge, and then not only do the letters emerge, but they actually contain the light, so you can actually express light through letters. They carry the light, right? The question there's obviously like this sort of scaling effect from high to low, and he's saying here, at what point does it happen that the division actually comes out and takes place? Because when the letters emerge, that's when there's division. You with me, Moshe? What's that? You following this?
Is there a parallel between it being infinite and then transforming?
You're like hiding over there behind your hoodie, behind the guy, behind the cigarette. We see you. You can't hide. You're trying to be the dissolved letters, but I can see you.
So is there a parallel between the two types of letters that you just said, and like infinite, the level of being infinite when it starts, and then when it changes, it becomes finite, or is it?
Yeah, the light becomes finite when it becomes containable by the letters, right? So what we're saying here is in the Zohar, it says the beginning of this division into letters, i.e. where the letters actually emerge and become something which is able to contain the light at some level, is in the midos, which we spoke about yesterday. The idea of the midos is sort of like the problem region. The midos is the emotional realm, because that's when a person takes on an opinion and takes on like a position which could then be, opposed. Aval mitzad chokhmah, taking it from line 7 here, mitzad chokhmah after the period, ein bechinis HeChaltzu ba'osios. There are no division into letters. At that point, the letters are negated inside of the light, because the light of chokhmah is very, very powerful. It's like the place where the Or Ein Sof enters into the worlds, and therefore the letters do not emerge, and therefore there's really no division there yet. It's like a true achdus and a unity. And why is that? Because the level of chokhmah, you already said, is this notion of ma, total bittul, right? Tachlis a bittul, harihu b'chinas tachlis a achdus fis klalus, and therefore there's no concept of, different opposing things, right? If the letters would emerge, that means each one would like hold their space, and then they would in theory be in a state of conflict with another space. So because there's such an overriding power of bittul there, nobody even gets off the ground to experience themselves as having like a space, which means the letters, which would confine the light, are in a state of total nullity, and therefore everything's in a state of perfect unity in that level of chokhmah. Follow? Okay, now we have a contradiction which we're going to try to resolve. He says, first it starts off by saying this does not contradict, meaning it's going to sound like it contradicts. But if we get deeper into it, it's not going to contradict what it says elsewhere, that the beginning of division does begin in the mind, right? Chokhmah is mind, right? So we're saying there's that in the Zohar it says the division begins in the midos and not in the chokhmah. Elsewhere it says the division begins in the mind specifically. Seems like a contradiction. How is it not? The Kamosh Kasuv b'Torah or Sof Divra Maskil v'Kibla Yehudim b'Inyan v'Yichan Yisrael Kulam Ki Yishachad. So in this mimer over there, the Alter Rebbe himself says that division starts in the mind. How do we explain this? So he says Shezeu Dafka Mitzad Haratzun Apashat Shelamayla Matam V'Das. Because when do we say the division starts in the mind? Because if you take this water analogy to its fuller end, there's the emergence of letters could be seen at different states. In other words, before the stone becomes like mamish, like a hard casing around the metal, right? It starts to emerge in a much more subtle way, and even subtler and subtler and subtler. So what we're saying here is that if you want to say that we're now talking about the sphere of Kesser, or Ratzon, will, which is above the mind altogether, there's absolutely zero division whatsoever, because there's even a fuller and deeper level of bittul of the rocks in the water, to the point that they don't exist at all. Whereas compared to the mind, there's already a little bit of congealing of the letters, right? But the letters in the mind are still considered like nothing compared to the letters in the midos. So when we said before that it really starts in the midos and not in the chokhmah, that's true, except if you're comparing it to the Kesser, which is even above a higher level of negation, in which case even in the mind you can make out a little bit of division. In other words, it all depends on, it's relative depending on how high you go.
You're saying in Kesser there's absolutely no division at all.
That's what he's saying. Like
a little bit
yeah, and the little bit in the mind is already considered like nothing compared to the very much, which is in the emotions, right? So it's not really a contradiction, it's just a relative conversation depending on how high you go. Because now that we're going to be honest with it and compare it to its true source, which is in the will above the mind, you can see that there is for sure a level of division inside the mind. In other words, what did we say before? That why do we say there's no division in the mind? Because you and I can basically agree to disagree without getting all worked up about it. And more than that, I can actually come to understand your perspective. If you'll be really just an intellectual, like a nerdy bookworm, without getting emotionally involved in the conversation, there's no reason why you can't put your argument before me and I can't accept that argument, at least intellectually, right? Like I see what you're saying. I don't agree with it per se. That's not how the chips are going to fall by me. But I could myself give your argument to someone else because intellectually I'm like bittul enough to just repeat your perspective. So in that level, there's definitely a level of bittul and negation in the mind versus the emotions, where I'm going to basically take a personal stand and then I'm going to oppose you on an emotional level based on what you think. So therefore we said the mind was very much bittul compared to the emotions. However, if you think about the mind compared to what's above the mind, of course you're going to come to the conclusion that the mind has distinctions. The very fact that you have one opinion and I have another opinion, even though we don't have to get emotionally charged about it, is already a level of division. So you can see how on one hand the mind is really bittul, and not like charged in its opinion. On the other hand, you can see that there is already divisions in the mind. You following this? Where are you missing me?
What are we talking about with letters? You're talking about letters.
Letters is another way of saying vessels, right? Which basically, like in our analogy, it's like the rocks, right? It's the idea of just like, for example, when you have a pure emotion, so deep of emotion, let's call it emotion of joy because we want to focus on the positive. There is a type of human condition where you're so emotional, you cannot express yourself. And not only can you not express yourself to another person, like you can't even express how you feel to yourself in letters because it's not verbal, it's emotional. Right? There is such a thing as just having an emotion, which is not necessarily a describable experience. It's an emotional experience, right? So if you could then describe it, it would already be a symbol that the emotion dimmed itself down a little bit to the point that it can fit inside of letters, which are like containers, which can then funnel this expression of this emotion through a linguistic, type of experience. Letters. That's what we say when letters are like vessels. They hold light, which pure light sometimes cannot be held by vessels when it's shining so bright. So the higher you go in the light, there's even something beyond emotion. There's an intellectual experience, which is also not verbal, right? It's the best way to understand it is in comparison to the emotion. Just like you can understand how there's an emotion that is not verbal, there's also something remember in the chart, right? The emotions are here, and the Chabad, Chokhmah, Bina, and Das, the intellect is above. So it's even more light, less vessel, right? It's harder for me to describe that because usually we think about intellect in terms of describing things and ideas in letters, but there's a place of intellect which is beyond letters as well, far beyond letters. So that being said, what we're talking about here is when the letters actually emerge, at what stage the letters actually emerge, in which case there's something called division. So we wanted to say before that in emotion, there's for sure letters have already, despite what I said that there's a possibility of having an emotion which is beyond letters, in general, your emotion can be, it can still be described, let's say, is it joy or is it sadness? So the very fact that it kind of like solidifies in some type of emotion already means the letters are having some impact on it. Even if you can't like contain them in full-blown sentences, the very fact that it's an experience of joy versus pain is already sort of that the rocks in the water have emerged to some degree to sort of say it's either this or this. You following me there?
Yeah.
So there's division for sure according to all opinions at the level of emotion. Letters have at some degree emerged. When you go up into intellect, we're saying compared to emotion, there is really no division there. And the example I was giving is because like you and I can both wrap our minds around to a certain degree opposite ideas and accept them, right? Without really taking a side. If we're just sitting like in a philosophical, which means that there's that one opposite can dwell inside of the other person without a problem. In other words, the divisions are not forcing us apart. There's this a same idea that would lead to joy. I could bring an opposing idea that would lead to pain, and before I allow them to sort of dip down and express themselves as emotions, the ideas themselves can reside without actually leading to this type of separation. I'll give you an example that's often brought in Chassidic for that, right? There's an idea that says that when Hashem wanted to destroy the world, he gave a reason because man is evil from his youth, right? When in the flood, I'm talking about. And then right after the flood was over, when he swore to never destroy the world again, he gave a reason. And what was the reason? Because man is evil from his youth. He gave the exact same reason. He's like basically, so therefore one idea was reason to be compassionate, and the same idea was a reason to be angry, to be like ferociously angry and kill and destroy. Because that level where it's still up in reason, the distinctions had not yet pulled it into two opposing forces. Because in the mind, one idea can theoretically go either way. You getting this? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you go into mind, there's seemingly no distinctions as opposed to emotions. However, the fact that in the mind it could even theoretically lead to going one way or the other means that there's something above the mind where there's literally no distinction whatsoever. It's like the pure will. Right? Why, for example, does that intellect at some point lead to destruction or lead to compassion? Right? In the intellect itself, it sort of could go either way. What makes it go this way or that way? It's like the pure will. Right? Because there's a will which is completely like beyond division in a sense, it could then dress up an idea to express one way or the other way. Because there's a place where in the will it's like completely yet undefined. In other words, the light is outshining the vessels to the point the vessels have no real leaning one way or the other whatsoever. They're in a state of total nullity. So that's what we're saying now, that in compared to the will, which is above mind, the Kesser, the highest sphera, even the mind is considered to be a state of distinction. Is it clearer?
Yeah,
Yeah?
definitely.
Okay, so now we're going to explain why, in fact, the mind really is filled with distinctions and separations, despite what we said earlier. And he said this is the idea that Yesh HeChaltzu she'ein deosei Shabbos. You see that everybody basically has a different opinion. Even though I could sort of accept your opinion intellectually, it's still not my opinion. Which means like the mind is dafka a place where people differ. Shekol echad ve'echad mischalik zeh mizeh. Everyone is divided from each other mitzad hasaga sichlo vinasu v'daito, because of the way he grasps the information that's presented to him, and because of and his das, right? Like, in other words, sometimes it's familial. You'll just sort of like take on the position of your family or your tribe or your clan or your religion, right? And like, that's just how you hold, right? It could take like an upheaval for someone to come and come and change your mind, right? So people, just the way they sort of grasp the world. Some people are math people. Some people are artisan types of people. When you come across a book, someone's going to take out, or a movie, someone's going to take out, one perspective, another one's going to like attach themselves to another perspective, because they're just the nature of their mind. It means everyone's different from each other. Our pure intellect is already in a state of division. The way you grasp it. V'gam kol inyan hamochin hu la'gebil kol davar. And not only that, but the whole concept of intellect is essentially something which it works by limiting something. Right? How do you determine that you've understood something? Because you, so to speak, found its edges. Right? You grab the intellectual piece of information. That's the only way you can say you understood it. So mind itself, we were trying to make an argument that there's no division there, but what he's saying here is it's like majorly division. It can't. There is no such thing as mind without division, because the way you understand something is by dividing it from something else. All grasping is accomplished by grasping the 6 directions of the thing. So, for example, in physical grasping, if I want to grasp this cup, I have to know which way is east. I don't have to know which way, but I have to basically wrap myself around the up, down, north, west, south, east concept, so that I can say, like, okay, I've got this thing, the circumference of the north, and if it doesn't have a northern circumference, or northern edge, it just goes forever in that direction, there's no way to grasp it, right? Grasping something requires that the thing I'm grasping has edges. And it's just like it's true in the physical dimension, it's true in the intellectual dimension. An idea which goes on forever cannot be grasped. And there are ideas like that. So we say, like, leis machshava tefiso be'klal. When you're talking about God, we say no thought can grasp him at all. And the reason is not because you're not smart enough. Even if you're as smart as you could possibly be, you could never grasp God, because he doesn't have edges. It goes on forever. Something, in order to be grasped by the mind, is just like grasped by the hand. It has to be a concept with edges. So you can say, where's the up of this? Where's the down of this? Where's the north side of this argument? Where's the south side, right? So the idea is that if something needs to be grasped by edges, then by definition, it's already something born out of division, right? Because if it has edges, it's divided from something else, from a different idea. How do I know where my idea ends and your idea begins if we're having an argument? You have to know, no, Rabbi Akiva said this and not this, because this is the edge of his conversation. So we're saying now that mind is like filled with division. It's defined by division, let alone being the undivided compared to the midos. But compared to the midos, it's still undivided. It depends on where you are. Kamo kain kol inyan shenitfas b'seichel, anything which is grasped by the mind, hu lefisha seichel magbilas ha'inyan. It's because the mind surrounds and limits the concept. V'gam kol inyan ha'seichel hu lechalek l'farer. And how do you use your intellect? You use it by specifically dividing it. If you want to understand something, you're going to go put your mind on it. The function of your mind is to go and find those divisions, find those edges, right? And to break it down into pieces. You say, like, let me break it down for you. That's like a very common way of saying, let me explain something to you, right? Breaking it down means taking something which is broad and whole and finding intrinsic divisions and further if you really are smart, it's like because you've gone like deep into the thing and broken it down into millions and millions of parts. Like you go to a Rav and he paskins and you accept his understanding because he knows how every little fraction of this argument comes out, like there's every little issue of it can be seen like this or like this, and within this it can be seen like this or like this, and like this and like this. So someone who's mastered the conversations, you say you really know it. It's because he's crumbed it up. The word lefarer means to like break it into crumbs. You know every little molecule of this thing, not just the general division of the concept, but the specific division of the thing down to all of its tiny parts. Kol davar l'riboy pratim dafka. Everything into its multiplicity of parts specifically. That's how you can say you understand it. Im kain, if so. Then what were we talking about before when we said that mind was like not divisible and only the midos? According to what we've just described now, mind is like the definition of division. That's how you use your mind. So he says so we said in one hand we could say, okay, it's called divided compared to the will. But even furthermore, even if you're not going to compare it to the will, it just is a beast of division. So now we're going to say let's look deeper into mind itself. Kol ze ikaru b'moach habina. Shehu b'chinas hasagavan and b'chinas tefisa b'seichel. That in the mind itself there's two parts. And when we talk about the idea of breaking it down, right? Bina, if you look in Rashi, when Yisro is sort of giving the advice to Moshe to find, certain great men amongst the people. He says you should find people who have bina. Rashi describes the word bina as davar mitoch davar. That's like the definition al pi pshat of Chumash of the word bina, understanding, which means to find something out of something else, which means to crumb it up, to break it down. So this is, when you're talking about the division which is found in the mind, shkoyach Yankee, grab a sefer. When you find the division in the mind, this is primarily a function of the part of the mind called bina, not chokhmah. And remember, why are we getting into this whole conversation to begin with? Just bring you back, because we're talking about midyan, if you remember, which is like the division of evil inside of ourselves, which makes us repel everyone around us with baseless hatred. And we said that is the dark side of the sphere of chokhmah. That's how this paragraph started. So Chokhmah is in Kedusha, the opposing force of Midyan in Klippa. And now we're breaking it down what exactly Chokhmah is. And we're saying that we've gone into this realm of mind, and now in the mind itself we're talking about the difference between Bina and Chokhmah. And we talk about mind being like something which is bearing division. It's specifically in the Bina part of the mind. Not the chokhmah, as we're going to see, which is like culpable of all this breakdown, like that. That's the way the mind is defined and works. Not the whole mind is defined and works like that. Only bina is defined and works like that.
Because chokhmah is on the very top and it's closest to Kesser, so it's more connected to that.
Not only that, but which is true, but also what you're saying is true. The higher you go, the less divided you are, just in principle, because the separation doesn't emerge yet. That's also true, but there's even a greater thing, that the function, if you remember we said before, that all other 9 spheres besides Chokhmah have a very distinct and different role. Their role is to define a power. I'm either this or I'm this, and it's very important to define yourself. What's the role of Chokhmah, we said, is to be like I've just reminded myself, Manis Friedman has this camp called the uncamp, right? He's trying to make a point. He's like, there's something wrong with camp, apparently, that he has to make the uncamp. Right? My niece just went there, so it's just fresh in my mind. But it's like there's a power which its function is to undo something, right? There's a power which is to break something down and find its parts, and then there's another power, which is the power of chokhmah, which is to go the other direction. It's to find this singularity amongst the parts, right? So if someone who has a function of bina, he's going to be like your accountant. You're going to tell him like your idea for your business, and he's going to give you 500 pages of how that idea breaks down, because you're like an idea man. You don't know, you don't get it. You just kind of have this big general idea, but he's going to come with all the breakdown to the details, and that's like your Jewish accountant. You need that guy on your team or you're not going to make it, right? But there's another brilliant, like Einstein type of figure, right? I don't want to say lahavdil because he's in like secular knowledge, but you have such a concept, right? That they do the opposite. Someone gives, and I'll give you an example from my father once told me when he was in law school, like the final test to be a lawyer, to like get your grade and like pass the thing, was that they gave you a case and you had to sort of distill the case into its essence. What is the case really about? So they gave him like a 3,000 page case. And they're like, what's it all about? Because that's how life works. It's very hard to understand life. God is really giving you a case. Every single person you know, and every single moment in your day is not just random as it seems. Hashem has designed this whole case. And your job is to figure out what the heck is going on. right? So you look through it, it's like there's a witness over here and a testimony over here, and there's a tax over here, and there's a, like a seizing of a house over here, and they all seem like just completely random things. Somehow it's all, boom, part of this 3,000 page case. And so my father, he's like a big chacham, he's like, he broke it down from 3,000 pages to like 800 pages. He's like, I got it, and they're like, go home, you didn't get anywhere. So he comes back and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I can't break it down anymore. This is basically what it's about, He comes down to a 500-page case, and this goes on until they're like, you don't understand what's going on here. What's the point of this whole thing? And he had to put it on a page. The whole 3,000 pages has to be put on. So what is that power? That's a power of chokhmah. You're not breaking something down. You're undoing the details, and you're making it the uncamp, right? You're basically, the function that you're bringing here is to minimize the plurality and to sort of find how all that plurality is really stemming from a singularity. That's the opposite of what we just described as the mind. We just described the mind as taking something and breaking it down into infinite parts. But there's another function of mind, which is finding the singular, and it's really a chacham. That's what you call a chacham. Really someone who's like a genius is the guy who can look at the whole thing and be like, it's this. Right? He gets the big bucks, whether it's in the law, or whether it's in the Torah, or whether it's in any corporation, because he's like, he sees the truth of the matter and he can find the chokhmah of the thing. Yeah. Right? Whether it's in biology, chemistry, the genius is the guy who's able to like sort of figure out what's really going on with this crazy plant. No, it's the sun hitting like the photosynthesis, and like he sees the simple singularity of how it all works together. So that's actually a power of undoing details, undressing the complexity and finding the singularity. So this is the power of chokhmah. So in there you can see it's not really based on division and dividing things and making more. It is a function of seeing how all the division is really part of one. And now you can see more how the opposite of that is midyan, just making division for division's sake. It's like the opposite of chokhmah. Chokhmah is not completely without division, but it's the undivision, right? It's recognizing that the purpose of division is that it's all part of a singularity, whereas midyan is making division for division's sake, right? And therefore, it's what's diametrically opposed. And we say havaya b'chokhmah. Chokhmah is the place where you really find the true source of yud kei vav kei. In other words, in the like the picture of the whole thing, remember we said Chokhmah is Yud, Bina is Hey, Vav is the Midos, and the final Hey is Malchus. So the Chokhmah, which is the Yud, if you think about it, the Yud is what we call the Roshei Tevos of the word, right? Like which the first letter of any word contains the whole word. So the whole Havaya, all the Yud Kei Vav Kei, is inside of the Yud. Because how did it come out, right? It's because it was all these different parts. That's why the Yud, by the way, is the gematria of 10, because the 10 spheros, which are going to be the details, they're all inside of that singularity of the Yud, because that's what the Yud does. It's not negating the concept of parts. It's just reminding you of the uncamp, right? That don't like get like glued into the concept of all these parts being truly separate, because they all came from my little Yud, which has all the 10 in them, but as one. So it undoes division by recognizing the true source of division. Okay. In any case, all this division comes from Bina, right? Here we're going to take it from, you see where we are there? The line starts, Habina. That's where you divide things and grasp the edges. And then Bina's function of the mind is to break things down into many, many parts. That's how you understand it. Even though, as I said before, Chachma is not will. It's not like a place which is completely beyond all details. It is part of the intellect. It's still dealing with the grand scope of all these details. It just has a different approach to the details. So even though it is also part of the mind, you're not, the function there is not to grasp the details and to find the edges, right? It's to uncamp, it's to undo all those edges and sort of see how there's something that lies at the core of them. Kiim b'chinis nekuda klalis, right? It's called the general point of the matter. L'mayla b'chinis is chalkus hapratim. It's easier to see it when you go, so to speak, from above to below than from below to above. In other words, mean to say, when someone has a flash of an idea, and then you need your Jewish accountant to break it down for you, you can clearly see how all that 3,000 pages of detail must have been inside of the general point. Otherwise, what was this guy breaking down, right? He was saying, like, okay, what you have there is a gold mine. I'm gonna mine the gold out of your flash of lightning. So you can see how all the details did originally come from a point. So it's almost easier. There's something called the Chochmah which precedes Bina, and the Chochmah which comes after Bina. The Chochmah which precedes Bina, right, is much easier in a sense to come by than the Chochmah which comes after Bina. What is the difference? What my father was doing with that piece of paper is the Chochmah that comes after Bina. You were looking at 1,000,000 points, and you're supposed to sort of figure out how it's all one. That takes a true genius. To have like a power of just an idea coming to your head, which is not yet delineated, we all have a certain measure of that. Some more than others. Some people literally have a $1 billion idea, and they just need a friend to come and break it down for them. But the point is, either way you look at it, whether you're starting with a point or concluding with a point, there is a place where all the details are actually as one. And therefore, even though it's also an intellectual process, it's a completely different form of intellect. It's the idea of finding the point, not delineating the pieces. Okay, just lost my place here. Okay. Yeah, Kiyadu, I think, right? Yeah, Einu b'chinas tviyah. The line starts with HeChaltzu hapratim. Period. As it's known and stated elsewhere. Furthermore, the bechinis is chalkus azos. The chochma v'seichel hari tachlisa his klalus dafka. So even the division that we're dealing with in the mind, right, where the mind does work in a realm of parts, nonetheless, in truth, the reason that you're breaking something down into parts is not because you're trying to make many out of one. You are. In other words, if I'm going to look at a complex argument, in order to understand it, I really have to make many out of one, because I have to understand all the details. So I am dividing something. But when you're trying to understand something, you're not just trying to make your life miserable and more complicated by saying that there's 16 different totally polar ideas here. You're just trying to break it down so you can actually understand how it's all one. You want to understand the klal. But if it's all packed up into a little yud, then I don't know what it means. Bina and das and chesed and gevura and tiferes, they have to come out. I have to divide them in order so that I can actually go back and understand my little yud. If I want to understand how this plant works, I have to go down into all the molecules and the photosynthesis and all the different processes. But why am I doing that? Because I want to say that it's not just a simple plant. It's 15, 16 different processes that have nothing to do with each other. No. I need to know those divisions for the sake of understanding the simplicity. So even if you're going to say mind is a child and a product of division, why were we happy to say before that mind was not yet a place of division, that only the midos and the emotions were the source of division? Because even the division of the mind, its function and purpose is to keep it all together and understand the simple oneness of the matter. There's dividing in order for the sake of unity, right? In other words, if I have like a bunch of guys standing in front of me, right, and I want to make a soccer team, I got to know like who's the fastest, who's got the best instincts, who's going to be able to defend, who's going to be able to be on offense, right? So I have to basically break down the details of everything in front of me. But why? Not because I want to have 10 different people doing 10 different things, because I want to have a team. And I really want to have one thing. I just need all these things to be understood in their parts in order to have the one thing properly. So even the division in that sake is actually for the sake of unity. And this is the big difference again between what we're going to see in a second, the division inside of Chochmah and Bina versus the division of Midian. Some characters out there and some characters in there, their intention of dividing is not in order to see how it all comes together. They're just looking to mess things up and divide. They don't want a team. It's like divide and conquer. They want to make sure that you're doing something which is not associated with what they're doing, and what they're doing is not associated with, so we can have like a chaos over here. Remember we said this is like tohu in its essence. We want to create chaos because there's some like place for me to thrive and potentially get more when you guys are all divided with each other. If there's a big team and I have to just play my role, I have to humble myself and take my small part. But if I can create a situation where everybody's fighting with each other and there is no whole, so it gives me the ability of grabbing more and more and more and more for myself. It's like a weird psychological issue that we all have inside of us. Are we here to see ourselves as a big whole? And everybody's got to come and take their place in the shul and daven at the right time and learn Chassidus at the right time. Or if this guy's sleeping in and this guy's sleeping in and this guy's sleeping in, I'm happy because there's more chaos, which means no one's going to bother me. Right? In a place of chaos, the individual thinks he can thrive more, but really he can't. Right? It's a huge klippa, because even though he thinks he can thrive more, how much are you going to really take already? You're going to at some point you're going to realize that you're just working in a realm of chaos, and the powers of kedusha eventually will come and put this whole thing together and put you in your place, and you're going to be the culprit. I don't know if I'm tying a few things together here, but. Odzos. What's furthermore, the bechinis HeChaltzu hazos, the chochma v'seicho, we said that the purpose of that division of the mind is actually to bring it all together. Kiddush yesh beis mini HeChaltzu, right? And we'll try and finish it up here. That there's two types of division which we just described. Aleph minis HeChaltzu shegorim lasos pirud. One is division for division's sake. You're trying to just break the thing up and dissolve the concept into just, chaos. כמו ישחלקוס הכוחos עצמיים שהם מחולקים בעצם זה מזה עד שאין להם קישור וחיבור ויסכללו זה מזה. So now, I apologize, we might not be able to just wrap this up. He went kind of Kabbalistic on us there, but remember before we said, where does this whole concept of just like dividing for the sake of dividing begin? Way back in the root of godliness, like he did this, right? And how did he do it? So go back to the concept for a second. Hashem was trying to make finite spheros for the first time, which is good. He was describing himself, but each sphere was coming from its source of infinity, and therefore each finite sphere only knew how to be infinite. And therefore they wound up clashing with each other and creating a world of chaos. So what we call those. So again, we said that there's three levels. There's what's called akudim, nukudim, berudim, which is another way of saying the three worlds of Adam Kadmon, Tohu, and Tikkun, or Atzilus. And what we're saying is that Adam Kadmon or akudim is like the Akeda, everything's bound into one. What does it mean to be bound into one? There's 10 spheros, but they're all residing in their state of pure infinity. They haven't been delineated into their parts yet, right? So each one is tinged with the light of pure infinite Ein Sof, and therefore they're actually the most pristine, amazing spheres you could have, because they really don't exist yet, because their potential. It's like the ultimate chokhmah, the ultimate being, which goes on forever. And at that point, they're not clashing with each other yet, because they haven't actually emerged from their cocoon to actually take any real individuality. So they're called the essential powers, kochos atzmim. Now the problem is when they come out of the womb, of the cocoon. Now each one comes out just like it was when it was inside, infinite, but finite at the same time, and therefore clashing with everything else that's finite. And what we have right there is called tohu, craziness. That's division for the sake of division. Their job at that point is to express their attribute of God. If at that point Chesed would say, you know what, I'm going to just chill myself out a little bit to give some room for Gevura, he would be failing his job to present the infinite essence of what Chesed is, because it would be watered down. So it's all part of the design. Hashem needs there to be the infinite expression of each midah. Otherwise, you're not allowing Hashem to do his thing, which is to show you that his midos are truly infinite, right? So when they come out, they have to come out infinite. It's their job. But then they're dividing from each other for the sake of division, right? They're all trying to take their own place, which creates chaos, because they need to, the function of that division is division itself. Whereas if you go to the next stage, each sphera starts to self-divide. Chesed says, you know what, let me see if I can find a little bit Gevurah and a little Tiferes and a little Netzach and a little Hor inside of me. So he starts to divide like Bina, like we said before, self-dividing into order to find all of its intrinsic parts within itself. That's a type of division which then enables the unity to come back together in the third world down of Tikkun or Berudim, when all the parts can then make the team. So that type of division is a division for the sake of unifying. Whereas the first type of division, when the powers come out for the first time on their own, they're dividing in order to divide. So there's division in order to divide, which is when the essential powers first come out. Or there's a division in order to unify, which is when those essential powers, having come out, start to self-divide and sort of classify themselves from within. Then it enables them to find the common denominator and the unity behind them all. So that's a division for the sake of unity, like the division of the mind. You getting all this?
So in Akudim, they're infinite and they're together.
In Nekudim, they come out individuated, but each one infinite. And that's why we call this a world of Tohu.
They're infinite, but they're one. Yeah?
That's in Akudim. That's when
what I'm saying.
in Akudim, yes. Nekudim is when they come out of that, now they're infinite and they're many. So that's the problem. That's called chaos. Now, you would say you can't do it, like it doesn't work, because you can't have two infinite things filling a space. But we're in a dimension where God is like activated, and he can have different infinite things existing at the same time. It doesn't create for much of a world. It's total chaos, but that's okay. It's a realm of chaos, right? But the point is to then fix it. And that's the world of Tikkun. Yeah.
I was thinking that with Bilam's idea, that was leading to midnight.
Right.
And but what he really wanted was to destroy the Jews.
Right.
And so he came up with things to convince them. Basically.
Right.
So it seems like a lot of, as I said, like in the past, future, whatever. What they'll do is they'll come up with some kind of a trick.
Yeah.
They'll describe a whole world that's a fake world,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they'll get a lot of people to come onto that.
Right.
And but it seems like their goal. There's a unifying goal in a way. I mean, there's chaos in
Right.
between, but there's a unifying goal. That's what they really want.
Right. It's like, it says like, for example, that Moab and Midian came together to fight the Jewish people, even though they themselves were in war with each other like for all eternity before that. Similarly, the Arab countries around here, they're all like factions of like different versions of their own people, and they're all fighting with each other forever. But they come together and create this like Arab unified force just to fight us. Whereas you leave them unto their own devices, they're all in war with each other. So this is exactly what we're saying. Like, there is a common denominator that in Tohu, which is crazy because the concept of Tohu is the opposite of common denomination. It's that everybody should be on their own, but it comes together. But what do they all have in common? Their interest in division.
Because they hate Tikkun.
Right. So when we come in and we're trying to say like there's rhyme and reason to everything, they can all agree on that. There's no rhyme and reason to everything. So even though they're all in conflict with each other, the one thing they can agree on is to stop someone who's trying to put it all together. Right? That's their common denominator is that there shouldn't be a common denominator. Right? This is the idea. So just to finish the chapter, I don't want to stop in the middle. So we're just at the end here. Sorry, where are we? All right, we have some real estate yet to go. We'll pick it up tomorrow. I don't want to hold everybody.